Okay, there we go. Today, thank you. Oh, let's see. I got a question from Anessa. Can I extend the due date for the fallacies paper to Sunday? Good question. Let me look at what we can do. So the fallacies paper is currently due um, on the 15th. Yeah, I suppose I could extend it to Sunday. Does anybody else need more time for the fallacies paper? Currently, it's due on Thursday. The latest says yes. Okay. All right. I'll go ahead and extend it to Sunday. Let's see here. It may mean that I take a little more time to grade it because I have a lot of the weekend free, but do not have a ton of time next week. But yeah, I'll go ahead and do it. That's all right. Okay, Sunday. I'll make it due at 11:59 p.m. Sunday. End of day Sunday. All right. So just updated that. Today, our plan is to go over 5C and 5D. So, we've got two new families of fallacies to cover today. This first one are fallacies of unclear language. So, the one thing they all have in common is some lack of clarity in language leads the argument's premises to not actually support its conclusion. Now, the nature of that lack of clarity differentiates these different fallacies from each other. So, starting off with question one, uh, this one equivocates and equivocates specifically on the use of the word poor. So, poor in this context probably means that he doesn't have much money. But poor in this context, when it's attached to poor loser, means that, he gets upset and throws a fit, right, when he loses. So these are just different uses of the same word, but they mean different things. And the argument really depends on the shift in meaning, right? So for equivocation, you should be able to identify a single term or phrase, a single concept that is deployed in different ways with different meanings across the argument, where it comes up in one place with one meaning and comes up in another place with a different meaning, right? Um, so that is what's going on here. That's a little different from amphiboly, which we'll get to in a little bit here. So, question 12, this is a slippery slope argument. Slippery slope arguments basically treat the premises as though they logically imply or causally imply the conclusion, when in fact there's not enough evidence to believe that these things will actually get there, right? There's not enough causal or rational connection between the premises, the sort of story the premises are setting up, and the conclusion that we get. Um, and typically, slippery slope arguments also involve some set of sort of innocuous premises that ultimately conclude in a disaster of some kind. So, the innocuous stuff here is a person beginning to question their most fundamental moral beliefs. And then ultimately, the disaster is social anarchy, right? Um, but there's not really enough reason to believe that each of these steps rationally implies the one after it. And because there are gaps here, that's why we shouldn't believe this conclusion. Question three, this is composition. So the composition fallacy starts off with a bunch of parts, and it says that each of these parts has some feature. And then it in the conclusion asserts that the whole thing, when you put all these parts together, when you compose them, that whole thing will also have this feature. But this is what's often called a fallacy. Both composition and division are fallacies of confused predication. Predication is where you say a thing has a feature, right? Like the car is red. I'm predicating redness of the car. The problem is that not all predicates apply to to parts the same way that they apply to wholes, right? Sometimes they do, but in a lot of times they do not. And the fallacy of composition is treating a predicate that applies to the parts as though it equally applies to the whole thing when you put it together. Division goes the other direction. It starts out with this whole thing and the premises, and then it draws a conclusion about each of the parts or one of the parts and says that because this whole thing has this feature, each of the parts must as well. And it's again a kind of error of predication. So just because each member of the chemistry department publishes these articles in peer-reviewed journals doesn't mean the chemistry as department as a whole does that, right? Chemistry department as a whole is composed of members that publish, but it does not itself publish. Question 4, this one goes the other direction. So here we're starting out with the whole thing, which is the independent party, and then we're drawing a conclusion about one of the parts, which is one of the members of that party. But saying that a political party is corrupt is not necessarily the same thing as saying that an individual in that party is corrupt, right? Corruptness may mean a different thing when applied to a party as opposed to applied to an individual. All right, question 5 is a little tricky. So this is our first amphiboly. There's a portion of the argument here, this, which is amenable to two different interpretations. One of those interpretations is a reasonable one, which is probably what the person intended to say. And the other interpretation is an unreasonable one that the conclusion depends on, right? So here there are two different uses of this portion of the argument, two different interpretations. The first, so when the governor says, so he's aghast at the burning and looting of this neighborhood in Los Angeles, and he describes the riots as the worst disaster for California since my election as governor. Now, what the governor probably meant was that he was elected governor, and then during the entire period of his being governor, this is the worst thing that happened during that time, right? That's a pretty reasonable thing to say. It's like maybe an awful event. It's the worst thing that's happened. The conclusion, though, that the governor has a low opinion of his performance in office, that depends on an alternative interpretation of this statement. Namely, that he was elected governor, and that was a really terrible disaster. It's the worst one. And then these riots happened later, and the riots were almost as bad as him being elected as governor, right? So that interpretation is probably not what the governor meant, but the conclusion depends on that unreasonable interpretation. Okay, one thing to note, a lot of people said equivocation for this one. The problem for identifying it as equivocation is that there is no single term or phrase that's used multiple times with different meanings. So the word governor comes up multiple times, for example, but in each case it means like the highest executive official in a state. It doesn't mean a different thing here than it does here. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's the main one that's used twice. Yeah, riots is used twice, but again, it just means, social disorder where things are getting destroyed and stolen, right? So yeah, there's no single term or phrase that's used twice and where the usage of it shifts over the course of the argument. This is the key difference between equivocation and amphiboly. Amphiboly, there should only be one portion of the argument, like a certain portion of a sentence, right? Or a clause or a whole sentence sometimes, that has two different interpretations, and the conclusion depends on the unreasonable one. For amphibole, you really need the same term or concept to come up multiple times and to have different interpretations across each of the uses of that term or phrase. Okay, that's what's going on in question 6. So the word sacrifices comes up multiple times in this argument. But unlike governor above, which is used in the same sense, there's nothing about the context of it which suggests a different interpretation. Sacrifices here does seem to have two different meanings. So sacrifices here means, when in the context of making, doing good for the community, means like, volunteering for charity, giving money to charity, spending time at a soup kitchen, giving out food, right? Stuff like that. But sacrifices here means like cutting people's hearts out and throwing them down the pyramid steps, right? The way that Aztecs sacrificed was sacrificing people. And that's a very different form of sacrifice, right? Um, and the conclusion depends on that shift in meaning, though, because it's saying, hey, we should do what the ancient Aztecs did. And that doesn't necessarily follow, right? Because there's a different meaning of the word sacrifice across these uses. Question 7 is another slippery slope. Anytime you read an argument and you go, oh, that's kind of dramatic, it's very likely a slippery slope. So we're starting out with just raising tuition fees, and then eventually the government doesn't have any money to do anything. That's a slippery slope because there's not really enough reason to believe that this one event will trigger all these other ones, right? Question 8 is another amphiboly. This portion of the argument has two different interpretations. Probably what the newspaper headline meant, the reasonable interpretation, is that there was some accident at the mine. And after that accident, because the workers were afraid for their safety, they decided that they didn't want to work anymore, right? But the conclusion that, like, I don't want to, like, the miners were right, basically, because I don't want to work after I'm retired, much less dead, makes it pretty clear that there's an alternative interpretation it's depending on, which is that, like, all these miners died, and now those same miners that died are refusing to work as ghosts, right? So there's two interpretations. The reasonable one, though, is not the one being used for the conclusion. It's the unreasonable one. Question 9. So this is another slippery slope. Here we're just accepting this particular view about the structure of the solar system, and then we draw this conclusion about life being without value. Not enough reason to believe that these things are logically or causally connected. That each of these steps is logically or causally connected, I should say. Question 10. Here we've got the collection that's hosted by the Metropolitan Museum, and they're supposed to be very interesting. But notice, or the collection is interesting. But notice that that does not imply that every piece is interesting. So it could still be true that the collection as a whole is interesting, but that's compatible with one or two of the pieces being kind of boring, right? Um, the what it means for a collection of works to be interesting is more forgiving than what it means for an individual work to be interesting, right? So here we've got division because we're starting off in the premises with this whole thing, which is the collection, and we're drawing a conclusion about each piece in that collection, which are each of the parts. So notice that composition goes the other direction. So there we would start out with every piece in the collection being interesting, and then we would draw a conclusion that the collection is interesting. But that would be composition. That would also be fallacious because even if you've got a bunch of interesting pieces, the collection might not be interesting if, like, the pieces clashed with each other or they didn't work well with each other, right? It might kind of ruin the interest in the overall collection, even if every piece was pretty good. All right, question 11. Here we've got each of the parts, each singer in the college chorus, and then drawing that's the premise, right? And then we're going to draw a conclusion about the college chorus as a whole. That's composition. And again, just because the chorus sings well doesn't mean that every singer in it sings well. The chorus singing well is compatible with like one person in it kind of not doing a very good job, right? Um, Question 12 is division. Here we're starting out with a properly run cruise in the Caribbean. That's the whole thing. And then that properly run cruise is made up, at least in part, by all of the employees that staff it, right? So each of the parts is the employees. Um, but what it means for a properly run cruise to be funded is not the same thing as what it means for each employee to be funded, right? Here we're starting out with the whole thing and drawing a conclusion about the parts. Question 13, each employee at Facebook has a strong commitment to privacy. That's the premise. We're talking about each of the parts of the company that is Facebook. And we're drawing a conclusion about Facebook, uh, the whole thing, right? So we're illegitimately putting together each of the employees and then saying that the whole thing, that once we put them all together, has the same feature that each of the parts does. That's what composition does. Question 14, humankind has already exceeded several billions in number. That's the whole thing. And each human is each of the parts. So starting out with the whole thing, drawing a conclusion about each of the parts, that's division. Question 15, everybody got was amphiboly, which is great. There are two interpretations of this. Probably the newspaper headline meant that there was some court case involving a violin and a drunk person, and that person was sentenced to 9 months in jail relating to that case. But the conclusion seems to suggest a different interpretation, an unreasonable one, that the drunk person was sentenced to spend 9 months in a violin case. It's a kind of error based on ambiguity about the word case. But notice that this is not equivocation because the word case doesn't come up multiple times. It's just amenable to two different interpretations. Okay. 16 is really weird. It's hard to even imagine what the conclusion is depending on, what kind of interpretation of this first statement the conclusion is depending on. Really, it has to do with a kind of ambiguity about the preposition in here. It's not clear who the preposition in is referring to. Is it the person who is jogging, or it was the person who, or was it the person that was driving the truck, right? Were those the same person, or were they different, right? Was the person jogging in the truck or not? The conclusion seems to suggest that it was the person jogging in the truck, right? Now, notice that the conclusion and the premise both use the concept of jogging, but I don't see any reason to believe these are separate. The same, like, have different meanings. Same thing with pickup truck, that comes up multiple times, but again, nothing about the context seems to suggest a different use of the word. So this is just amphiboly. This whole statement is amenable to two different interpretations, and one of them is really weird. Question 17. Ocelots is the group. That's the whole thing, right? And the conclusion is about Sparky, this individual ocelot. So we're starting out with the whole thing and drawing a conclusion about one of the parts. Question 18. This has two different interpretations. The reasonable one is probably like, look, you're not going to get better medical services if you go somewhere else. This place has the best ones. But the conclusion seems to suggest an alternative reading that if you go there, if you use those medical services, your health will not improve, right? You won't get better. That's really the problem here is this is amenable to these two different interpretations. The conclusion depends on an unreasonable one. Question 19 is similar. I found an elephant in my pajamas. Again, we have a kind of confusion about the preposition in. Who is in the pajamas? Is it the elephant or is it the person who saw the elephant? The conclusion depends on it being the elephant, but that's probably not what the person meant, right? So this whole statement, because of that ambiguity about that preposition, is amenable to these two different interpretations. Same thing's going on here with question 20. Employees must wash hands. The reasonable interpretation of that is like, if you're an employee and you use the bathroom, you need to wash your hands. The other interpretation of it is that if any hand washing is getting done in the bathroom at all, it must be done by an employee. Uh, and I don't think that, so the conclusion depends on that, but that's probably not the most reasonable interpretation of that portion of the argument. Question 21 is equivocation on the concept of heart, right? Cardiologists are doctors that practice medicine of the heart. Here we mean the actual physical organ beating in your body. But when your girlfriend breaks up with you and breaks your heart, that's a different use of the term. Your physical organ in your body is unaffected, mostly. But it's an emotional state, right? Of loss and grief, maybe. So this conclusion, though, that I should go see a cardiologist depends on that shift in meaning. Question 22 is composition. We're starting off in the premises with each of the parts, which is each student at our class or at our college, and we're drawing a conclusion about the college in general, the whole thing. And again, taking the predicate takes a logic class applies to students, but does not apply to students when put together as a whole student body, right? Or at least when put together as parts of a college. The predicate doesn't apply to the whole thing the same way it applies to the parts. Question 23, the word bank is being used two different ways, right? This use of the word bank probably means side of a river, and this use of the bank means financial institution. So these are two different uses of the word, but the conclusion that Chase Bank is muddy depends on this shift in meaning. I like this one the best out of all the questions on homework 5C. So bishops can only move diagonally, and the Pope is the Bishop of Rome. Therefore, the Pope can only move diagonally. So here the word bishop means chess piece, right? They can only move diagonally on the board. And here bishop means church official, right? And so these are two different uses of the term. So the conclusion that the Pope can only move diagonally, it depends on that shift in usage. Finally, question 25. Here we're starting out with the whole album. It has this feature. It runs for 108 minutes total. And then we're going to draw a conclusion about each song on the album. And those are each of the parts. So whole thing into its parts, that's division. Okay, any questions about 5C? Some of these were a little weird. I like the Pope one. I don't know why, but just like to imagine the Pope like being forced to only move diagonally. All right, let's get into fallacies of relevance. There's a couple in here that are a little tricky. So the thing that all these fallacies have in common is that they throw something irrelevant at you in the premises to distract you from the fact that there isn't really an argument for the conclusion, that the premises don't really support the conclusion at all. Now, the nature of that distraction is what differentiates these fallacies from each other. So, starting off here with question 1, here we've got this person saying this thing about what the prime minister believes or what he's going to do, what he says he's going to do. And then this person interprets what they said. Now, this interpretation is probably not a fair one, right? There is probably, this is probably not what the former prime minister actually is trying to say. Like, Nobody would say, my political position is that we should surrender to the enemies of freedom, right? Nobody wants that. Nobody would say that. That's a straw man of what that person said. So for the straw man fallacy, what you have to imagine is two people having an argument. One person states what they're saying, states their argument, and then the second person makes an argument in response that mischaracterizes, misconstrues unfairly the first person's argument, right? And straw men are a distraction tactic. They allow you to pretend like the other person you're arguing with, is unreasonable or stupid or crazy, um, and that therefore nobody should listen to them. When in fact, you really haven't addressed the substance of their argument at all because you're arguing against a different argument that they didn't make, right? So, um, I mentioned the principle of charity earlier in this class that when we're reconstructing an argument, when we're trying to figure out what somebody is trying to say, we should construct it in a way that makes it as strong as possible. That's the principle of charity. When people don't follow the principle of charity, they engage in straw man arguments. When they don't try and come up with, okay, what was this person actually trying to say? What's the strongest version of what they could be trying to say? And let's address that. But instead, come up with a weaker, stupider version of what the person is saying. That's what a straw man is. So notice that a straw man mischaracterizes what somebody's views are, what their statements are, what their argument is. It does not necessarily attack that person personally based on their character. That would be ad hominem. And this is for the fallacies of relevance, the easiest mistake to make is to mistake the straw man fallacy for ad hominem, right? And the nature of the target is different here. Ad hominem is about the person's character. Straw man is about their views or what they said or what their argument is. Okay. Question 2 is a simple appeal to force. So, the only reason why we should believe this conclusion that it'd be good to be back in class, right, is because if you don't do that, the person is going to throw your Xbox away. Now, here's an important thing about appeal to force, and I want you guys to keep this in mind when you're writing your fallacies papers. Your fallacies paper is an assignment where I'm having you go and look at political ads and then analyze the ad and tell me why it is a particular fallacy, right? Now, a common error I see in that assignment is for people to say that an argument is that an ad is engaging in appeal to force. Like they will see an ad that says something like this, if you elect this person, these terrible things will happen, right? And they'll say, well, that's appeal to force because it's threatening the viewer. But technically speaking, that's not an appeal to force. An appeal to force is where the person making the argument is the person threatening the audience of the argument. So whoever's receiving the argument, hearing it, and deciding what to believe, if that argument contains a threat against that person, that's an appeal to force, right? And that's different from saying that, look, you shouldn't vote for this person because these bad things will happen, not because I'm doing it, but because they will do it or something else bad will happen, right? That's not an appeal to force. It's an appeal to fear, right? So I have yet to see a single political ad which is an appeal to force. What it would require is for the person who paid for the ad to be threatening the viewers of the ad that like, look, if you better vote for me or else. You better vote for me or I will send my goons to beat you up. That would be an appeal to force. But basically nobody does that, right? People don't respond well to that kind of message. So the short story is do not say appeal to force in your fallacies paper. You're going to be wrong and you're going to lose points. Okay. This is appeal to force, though. The only reason for the conclusion is just this threat to the audience. Question 3 is a kind of appeal to emotion, specifically the emotion of sympathy. In fact, some logic textbooks find this to be such a common appeal to emotion that they give it its own special category. but I've kind of grouped them all in together. If an argument only tugs at your heartstrings in some way, or makes you angry, or makes you feel disgusted or contemptuous of somebody, or jealous of them, or exploits your desire not to be left out of the cool kids group, right? That is always an appeal to emotion, right? Now, technically speaking, it's only an appeal to emotion if there are no other reasons presented for the conclusion in the argument. But when you're saying appeal to emotion, what you should be trying to do is figure out, okay, which specific emotional state is this argument trying to evoke? And there's a bunch of different ranges of emotion that the argument can be trying to evoke. It's not always fear. It sometimes it's fear, but sometimes it's anger, disgust, contempt, jealousy, feelings of not wanting to be left out, right? Those are all appeals to emotion. This one is sympathy, though, because we're saying, look, it's going to be so difficult for this young man to have a career in the corporate world, and but maybe what he did is bad enough to be fired, even if it's going to negatively impact his career, right? Question 4 is appeal to force. Notice that this isn't like threatening physical violence against you, but it is threatening to inconvenience you. If you get this call that says, hey, look, we're hoping you give us a contribution because because if you don't, we'll put speed traps on your street. Well, that's an inconvenience. It's something you probably don't want. It's extra monitoring of your behavior by law enforcement, right? And that's the only reason offered for the conclusion why you should donate to this police retirement fund or whatever. Question 5. This is appeal to emotion. Look, we shouldn't harass General Pinochet with the possibility of a trial and imprisonment, right? After all, he was 90 years old when the opposition wanted to try him. That is an appeal to sympathy. We're trying to say, look, he's an old, doddering old man. Like, he's not somebody that we should be putting in prison because he's too old for it. Um, but that may not be relevant to whether he should go to prison. This is referring specifically to the CIA installed dictator of Chile after the CIA overthrew their democratically elected government back in the 70s. We didn't like that Chile elected a socialist, and so we had him murdered and put in this strong man who murdered thousands of people. Anyway, one of the many times we have done that. Question 6. Global warming. The global warming theory maintains that everything's getting warmer, not colder. The conclusion is here that there is no global warming. The problem is that this isn't what global warming means. It's not saying that everything is getting warmer all the time. It's saying that on average, the Earth climatologically is getting warmer, right? That's compatible with certain parts of the Earth getting a little cooler, right? Including, your tea sitting there in the cup. So this is just a straw man. It misrepresents what the other person, well, or in this case, what the view of what global warming is, right? Question 7 is an ad hominem. Jane's reasons for being a vegetarian have no force since she can't resist smoked salmon. Well, this is just pointing out that Jane, because she can't resist smoked salmon, is a hypocrite. But as I covered in the lecture, hypocrisy is not really a guide for truth. Just because somebody's a hypocrite doesn't mean what they're saying is false. People have all kinds of reasons. People are complex, right? People have all kinds of reasons that might lead them to say one thing and do something that contradicts it. But that doesn't mean that what they said is false. Sometimes hypocrites are right? Um, yeah, this is an ad hominem. It's specifically a tu quoque ad hominem, which is appeal to hypocrisy. And it's an attack on this person's character, because generally being a hypocrite is a bad thing, right? The same thing's going on here in question 8. This is also an ad hominem. This person flies a lot, so they're a hypocrite about their messages about the destruction of the environment. But, they could be a hypocrite, but still be right that we shouldn't be destroying the environment, right? That doesn't seem impossible. Question 9, another ad hominem to quoque once again. Here we have this person saying, members of one party have no business accusing members of the other of the very thing they do themselves. Well, maybe the other party is hypocritical about this, but that doesn't mean their criticism is wrong, right? Question 10. This is trying to get us to feel bad for Tom because he was struggling to come to terms with the death of his mother at the time he committed this armed robbery offense. But of course, whether he was going through difficult life circumstances may be irrelevant to whether he should be acquitted if he did the crime. Maybe it's a mitigating factor that means his sentence shouldn't be as harsh as it otherwise would be, but it definitely shouldn't mean you should acquit him. Yes, this is an appeal to emotion, trying to get you to feel bad for him. Question 11 is an appeal to emotion. Doesn't it just make you furious that they were so smug about it? This is trying to get you to feel angry at the other side and therefore believe this conclusion, even though there's not really any good reason for it. Question 12 is another appeal to force. Sometimes appeals to force are implicit, right? They're not like, do this or I will do this bad thing to you. Sometimes they're just like a vague threat that if you don't do this thing, something bad might happen. This is a common mafia tactic, right? So that's what's going on here. 13 is an appeal to emotion. He looked so sad the last time we scolded him for it. Herbert used to knock over the trash all the time, and then he would always feel bad for himself afterwards and look guilty. But that doesn't mean that you should allow your dog to knock the trash over all the time, right? Herbert was really good at appealing to emotion. So, question 14. This is a straw man. So, this is mischaracterizing Bernie Sanders' view about Medicare for all. It sounds like his plan is just to take all our hard-earned money in taxes. Well, that's probably not his plan, right? Nobody would come on national TV and say, my plan is to take all your hard-earned money in taxes. Like, that's not the whole substance of his plan, right? Medicare for all is the idea that everybody would be covered by one national insurance plan, so you wouldn't have to worry about United Healthcare denying your claims on the basis of their made-up AI nonsense. But yeah, it would require raising taxes, but if you look into it, it would save us a lot of money because we spend tons of money on healthcare premiums. Anyway, this is a misrepresentation of what Bernie Sanders was saying. 15, this is a straw man. So notice that Trump is saying he's mischaracterizing what Ilhan Omar's views are. He's saying that her views are anti-Semitic and anti-Israel and ungrateful to the U.S. But given that this was a while ago, we have this little extra information, right? It's not actually true. Oh, I went back on accident. It's not actually true that her statements were about, Jewish people in general. She was criticizing AIPAC in particular, this one group that gives money to politicians to support Israel, right? So a few of you said ad hominem for this one. This gets at a kind of tricky distinction between ad hominem and straw man. So if you call somebody an anti-Semite, that borders, it kind of straddles the border between ad hominem and straw man. So it'd be a straw man if somebody wasn't actually an anti-Semite. It wouldn't be a straw man if they were. It depends on what their actual views are. To say somebody's like a racist or an anti-Semite, though, could be just by itself a direct indictment of their character to the extent that you think racism is a bad character trait to have, right? But I think in this case, and so it might be a little tricky to distinguish these when it comes to that kind of question. The key thing here, though, is that he's talking about her statements. So when you're talking about somebody's statements or their views, and you're criticizing those statements or views, and you are mischaracterizing those statements or views, that's a straw man. If you're talking about somebody's personal character, that would be an ad hominem, right? So here we've got this is about statements, so straw man is the better choice. Question 16 is trying to get you, it's appealing to your FOMO, your fear of missing out. This is an appeal to emotion as a result. Uh, this is also called the bandwagon appeal. Like everybody get on the bandwagon, everybody's doing it, right? Um, but you may have heard your, mother say this when you were growing up that if, would you jump off a bridge if all your friends were doing it, right? Um, that's pointing out the basic fallacy in the bandwagon appeal, which is sometimes the group is wrong, and sometimes you have good reasons for not going along with the group. Okay, question 17. If the reason why the neighbor says she doesn't have to pick up after her dog is that it's disgusting, that's an appeal to emotion, really directly, right? Look, I don't want to do this because it's gross. Uh, there's no further reason being offered for this conclusion that she shouldn't have to pick up after her dog, only that it's gross. So disgust is an emotion, right? And this argument is appealing to it rather than giving any reason for the conclusion. Question 18, by contrast, even though it's got the same conclusion, is basically an appeal to somebody's hypocrisy. It's a tu quoque. Look, if you don't do this, then why should I have to? Well, other people being hypocrites does not imply anything about the way you should act, right? You should act for your own principles based on your best understanding of what's morally and ethically required of you, not not conform your principles to what other people's, uh, to the fact that other people fail to live up to theirs, right? Okay. Question 19. This is an appeal to force. We're basically threatening to close our borders with the Canadians to force them to do this thing, stop letting Americans buy cheaper Canadian prescription drugs. And finally, question 20 is an ad hominem, another tu quoque. Um, one thing I don't super like about this homework assignment is it's got too many tu quoques and not enough of the other kinds of ad hominems. I may need to go back and make some modifications, but I think you guys tracked it fairly well. So this is appealing to the fact that this guy owns an iPhone and Foxconn makes those, so we shouldn't listen to his complaints about the way that Foxconn treats their workers. All right. Any questions about 5C and 5D? Okay, so let's see here. Let's see if I've got a good practice here. So one thing to note is that you guys have your midterm open now. We're not taking it. Let me talk a little bit about the midterm. Actually, yeah, it's due tomorrow at the start of class. So it's open now, but you don't have to take it right now. In fact, I'd recommend you do a little bit of practice before you take it. Um, the midterm is a 50 question multiple choice test drawn from a test bank. So everybody gets a different midterm, right? So your question one will look different from everybody else's question one, uh, and so on. Um, so, uh, but they're all weighted to be approximately the same level of difficulty. Now, a few things to note. There are a few rules with regard to the midterm. So I have uh, I have Brightspace set up to report a lot of things to me. You are not allowed to use generative AI in answering these questions on the midterm. You are not allowed to consult with each other about the content of the midterm. Your midterm must be turned in by the start of class next time, or you will get a 0. Only under extreme extenuating circumstances do I give anybody any kind of extension on the midterm. Like, you know, you have to be in the hospital or somebody very close to you has to be in the hospital and you have to provide documentation, stuff like that. Um, now, so you must get it done by that time. Once you start the midterm, you will have 2 hours to complete it. I generally find 2 hours is adequate for this length of test. Um, if you do not submit it within the 2 hours, that also might be a problem, right? As a Brightspace will tell me if you took too long on it. Um, I don't think I have it set to auto submit, but Brightspace will tell me that. Let's see what else. The midterm covers everything that we have covered in this class up from the starting day all the way up to now. So it includes everything up to the fallacies content, up to and including the fallacies content, right? Um, so, uh, yeah, this is worth 25% of your grade, and you only get one crack at it. So try and make sure you go into it ready. All that said, this is an open materials test. So you have access to the internet, obviously, while you're taking it. You don't have to take it synchronously with me. In fact, I don't want you to. Uh, you can take it at any point between now and the start of class tomorrow. Um, and let's see. Um, what else do I want to say about it? I feel like that kind of covers the waterfront with regard to it. You can use any of the materials, though, like any of the practice assignments. You can use any of the, while you're taking the exam, any of your notes, any of the lectures, any of your homework results, anything like that. It's all fair game. You're just not allowed to collaborate or use generative AI when you take the test. Any evidence of collaboration or use of generative AI will be forwarded to the Dean of Students as for an academic integrity investigation. So don't make me have to do a bunch of extra paperwork, please. Um, let's see. So that's the midterm. I would recommend, as you prepare for the midterm today, that you go into practice and supplementary materials and do a little bit of practice. So we have a bunch of quizzes, practice games here under practice and supplementary materials. We also have a bunch of just practice questions that are set up here on Brightspace. These include some of the more difficult stuff that we've covered so far in this class, right? Especially validity and soundness, inductive reasoning, right? So these two are both lecture 2, and this is lecture 3, and this is lecture 5, right? Um, so if you want to be super prepared for the midterm, I would recommend going and doing all these between now and when you take it, and checking your answers to see if you're right. Another question, do you guys feel like we should do a little bit more practice while we're here together today on Venn diagrams? I know they're not the most fun thing, but we could do another round of what we did when we were covering Venn diagrams, if it would be helpful to you guys. What do you guys think? Ali is saying yes. Okay, let's do one round. Uh, I'll keep it brief, but I think it might be helpful. Yeah. So here, I'll start a whiteboard. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll just make up an argument here. Let's say, um, um, we'll do this. No, we'll use some D&D classes here for this. All right. Remember the steps here. So the first thing to do, say we're trying to assess validity here and we're using a Venn diagram. I will indicate to you on the exam, by the way, whether or not you should do a Venn diagram or whether you should do it using the intuitive method. If I don't say Venn diagram, I mean for you to use the intuitive method. So the first step here is to identify the conclusion, which I've put in the third claim here. This is the conclusion. No paladins are warlocks. So the second step is to identify the number of categories in the argument. So the first category here is paladins. The second category is things that are lawful good. Um, and the third category is warlocks. All right. So I'm going to label, and remember, if you only have two categories, then you're only going to draw two circles. But here we have three categories, so we have to draw three circles. I'm going to label each of these subcategories, right? Move this around just a little bit. And again, like we did before, I'm going to ask you guys to tell me which of the numbered subcategories I would need to shade to represent this first claim. So private message me, and I will tell you if you get it right. Daniel's asking, and the fallacies paper is now due the 18th. That is correct. I've moved it to Sunday night. All paladins are lawful good. Which two would I need to shade? Makai's got it. So far, only Makai is taking a guess. And Essa's got it. So I'm seeing a lot of people say 7 here. Let's remember an important thing, right? So the first category that comes up in the statement is the circle we're going to be doing something with. So this is the paladin circle or semicircle, it's not the best drawn circle. Uh, this statement is about paladins. So if you said 3, 6, or 7, you should know that that can't be right because this statement is about paladins. And so this circle is what we're going to be doing something with. So that leaves 4 possibilities here, but at least removes these ones, right? Good job, Daniel. Daniel's got it as well. All right. So what you would need to shade to get this right, to represent this first claim, right, is 1 and 4. And I hope you guys can see why it's 1 and 4. The reason is that if you're in 1, say you're one of these D&D characters in 1, right? Well, if you were, you would be a paladin, but you wouldn't be lawful good, right? Because you're not in this circle. You're not in this lawful good circle. And if you're in 4, you'd be a paladin, but you're also not lawful good. And this statement says all paladins are lawful good. It means the only thing that should possibly exist in this circle is in the overlap between this circle and the things that are lawful good circle, right? This that means 1 and 4 cannot exist if all paladins are supposed to be lawful good, because these guys would not be lawful good, right? So if there were anything in there, this statement wouldn't be true. We are supposing, in putting together this Venn diagram, that the premises are true and representing what the logical relations between these categories would look like if the premises are true, right? For the purpose of then looking at those logical relations and seeing if the conclusion is guaranteed given those logical relations, right? Okay, so a few of you guys said 2 and 5. If you shaded 2 and 5, remember shading says that if you shade something, it means there's nothing in that subcategory. It's like think about shading as though you've put up a bunch of construction tape, right? Where nobody can go in there. Um, that's what shading means. So 1 and 4 would be indicating that there's nothing that's a paladin that isn't lawful good. If you shaded 2 and 5, it means there are no paladins that are lawful good. That's the opposite of what number 1 is saying, right? Okay, now let's go on to the second one. I want you guys to private message me. How would you represent this claim that no warlocks, remember that's the circle we're going to be talking about, are lawful good? Which 2 would you need to shade? Makai's got it. Yeah, you got it, Pranima. Good. Yeah, Joang, this is about representing number 2 here. Which 2 do you need to shade to represent claim number 2 here? And S has got it. Excellent. Daniel's got it. Okay, so a lot of you guys said 2 or 3. 2 and 3 is not correct. Can anybody tell me why we know that 2 and 3 is not correct right away? Why this can't be 2 and 3?
I would say because number 3 is talking about the things that are lawfully good,
Mhm.
and they are talking about which is not.
Yeah, so well, that's close. So notice this statement is about the warlock circle, right? It's making a claim about its relationship to the lawful good circle, but the statement is about the warlock circle. That tells us this is the circle we're going to be doing something with, right? This is the circle we're going to be putting some kind of shading in. So 2 and 3, those are not even in that circle. These are a different subject matter, right? These are not in the circle. And so you don't even need to worry about 1, 2, or 3 here because this statement is about warlocks. It's about this circle. So that's how you know it can't be 1, 2, or 3. I mean, we're not going to represent this last claim, but like, notice this last claim is about paladins. So if you were going to represent this um, on the Venn diagram, which you shouldn't because this is a conclusion, but if you were, notice that that statement would be about paladins, so you wouldn't have to worry about 3, 6, or 7. If I added another statement and I said, you know, things that are lawful good are paladins, um, that statement is about things that are lawful good. And that's this circle. So if we were going to represent that circle, we wouldn't have to worry about 1, 4, or 7. Um, we're not going to be shading anything with regard to 1, 4, or 7, right? The first category that comes up in the statement is the circle you've got to worry about. It's the circle you might be doing something to. So that's something to watch out for, right? Okay, what's the circle? Which circle are we talking about? Okay, it's the warlocks one. It's the first category that comes up. Okay, so a lot of you guys got this though, which is good. The correct answer here is 5 and 6. I have a hell of a time putting lines in there, I think. Good enough. This whiteboard tool leaves something to be desired, but 5 and 6 is the correct answer here, right? If we're trying to represent this claim, no warlocks are lawful good. Notice it's in the warlock circle, right? And what does it say about the warlock circle? It says nothing in that circle should also be in the lawful good circle. Because if you were in 5 and 6, you'd be a lawful good warlock. And this says no warlocks are like that. No warlocks are lawful good, right? Okay, so let's talk about the validity of this argument. So given what we've drawn, remember, we do not draw the conclusion. We just look at the conclusion and we go, okay, is this guaranteed to be true given these relations between the categories? If it is guaranteed to be true, then the argument is valid. If it is not guaranteed to be true, if there's some way to put it together where maybe you do get a paladin that's a warlock, then the argument is invalid, right? And remember what these different the different sort of nomenclature of the Venn diagram is. Shading means there's nothing in the category. Blank means there could be something in the category. And then we haven't used the little X's with question marks for this one because there are no non-universal claims. But X means there is something in the category. And X with a question mark means there might be something here, but there could be something. It could be in the other spot with an X with a question mark, right? Okay, so last question with regard to this one. What is this argument valid or invalid? Just private message me valid or invalid based on that reasoning. Okay, he's got it. Vanessa's got it. John's got it. Abby's got it. Arian's got it. Daniel's got it. Timothy's got it. Good. Okay, so if we look at this, this says no paladins or warlocks. Well, if we had left either 4 or 5 blank, we would not be able to conclude this because there could be a paladin that's a warlock. If 4 and 5 had been left blank, there could be something in there. Because paladins, 4 and 5 are paladins that are warlocks, right? However, this argument is valid, right? Because there are no paladins that can be warlocks given these relations, right? 4 and 5 are the only things that really are that would make sense. Like if there were anything in 4 or 5, these would be paladins that are warlocks, and this says no paladins are warlocks. But we know based on the fact that we have shaded this out that there's nothing in either of those subcategories, right? There's nothing in there. So there couldn't possibly be a paladin that's a warlock, right? The only things that could be paladins are things up here and two, right? We've closed off every other possibility for where paladins can show up, and they're not in the warlock circle. One thing to note is there are warlocks still in seven, right? They exist, or they might exist. There could be some warlocks out here, but we know that if it's in seven, it's not a paladin because it's not in the paladin circle, and therefore we don't have to worry about seven, right? Only four and five could render this claim false. And we have basically excluded the possibility of anything being in four and five using the premises. Okay, so your answers to this suggest to me that there's still some work to do. There's still some review you guys should do about Venn diagrams before you do the final exam. Some of you guys were nailing all of them, which is good. It means you're on the right track. Probably should still do a little bit of practice to make sure that you're making progress on it and that you're not going to be surprised by anything on the final. But yeah, it'd be worth going in and doing the validity and soundness practice under practice and supplementary materials. You should have plenty of time to do that today, I hope, before you do the final exam. Not the final exam, the midterm exam. So you have quite a bit of stuff to do in this class today. The persuasion assignment is not super difficult. And tomorrow the plan is to go over both that persuasion assignment and also the midterm exam answers. So just note, you also have this persuasion homework. Like a lot of stuff is coming due by tomorrow in this class, which is part of the reason why I was okay with pushing back the fallacies paper. But yeah, any questions about the midterm? Any questions about what our plan is? All right, guys. Well, if you have any questions about it, about any of this stuff, feel free to send me an email. John, you're asking if you don't do too well in the midterm, are there any extra credits to boost the score? Not really. So there's one opportunity for extra credit in this class, and it's related to the student evaluations. So when those come out, if we can get up to 80% of the class participating in the student evaluations, I will give the entire class a 1% bonus credit. The only other way to get sort of extra credit in this class is the homework makeup assignments, but those can only really improve your homework portion of the grade. So the final and midterm exams really are they're really like cumulative assessments where they're not formative assessments like the homework is, where you're doing extra practice and getting better at it over time. The midterm and the final are really like summative assessments. They're like, how well did you understand this stuff at the end of the day? So you only get one shot at them, and you're not going to be able to make it up if you don't do well. So please take the extra time and do some practice before you just decide to sit down and take it. And again, note that it has to be done within 1 2 hour sitting. So when you start it, the clock is ticking. You can't just like start it and come back 12 hours later like you can with the homework. Yeah. It's really the midterm and the final exam are really the only punishing parts of this class, I think, like in terms of the pedagogy. But yeah, I think at some point you just kind of have to prove that you know this stuff, right? So, all right, cool. Well, let's go ahead and break there for the day, guys. I will meet you guys tomorrow, same time, same place, and we'll go over the midterm and the persuasion homework. Good luck on the midterm exam, guys. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you, Professor.